welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I'm very, very excited to welcome back this author who wrote a really interesting book called Siren Says that it's so difficult to really describe other than it's a witchy book, but it has so many layers to the character relationships and to how magic works. And it is in a contemporary time period and takes place here in America, although it has its roots elsewhere. So please introduce yourself and tell us about Siren Says.
So my name is Jennifer Michelle Herrera. Also, thank you for having me back. I was on this show about 3 years ago, and it was such a delight. So I'm excited to be here.
I was delighted to see that you had a book and you were interested in coming back. So you're
Oh,
welcome,
for
and
sure.
thank you as well.
And the book Siren Says, you're right. It's about a lot of different things. I think at its core, it's about this witch who has botanical magic. That is, she uses plants. They're real plants that exist in our real life. Um, to do stuff, but her magic is really powerful and she's afraid of her own power. And so in order to wield it, she has to learn to embrace the dark side of herself and crucially, how to remember her own humanity after.
So you like plants yourself, right?
I love plants. I love plants.
I love how that was so apparent and woven so seamlessly into this story. But where did the character of Raven come from and just the idea of this world and what it means to be a siren in this particular world?
I think, when I wrote my last book, I wrote it in 2020. I felt like it had to say something big and political. Like it felt like that was the moment we were living in. And when I went to write my next book, now it's much later. And I felt like we were all kind of tired and we all needed a bit of an escape, but an escape that wasn't like destroying our connection to our own lives, but an escape that was really helping us establish more of a connection to the things in our lives that are real and healthy and nurturing. And so I wanted to write a book that had to do with magic to give you this sense of awe and wonder and just joy that I felt was missing. And then the magic had to for me, be rooted in plants because I think plants are pretty spectacular. I read this book called The Light Eaters. I don't know if you ever read it. It's a nonfiction book, but basically trying to ask the question of, are plants sentient? Can they feel things? And we want to say absolutely not. They're just plants. But actually, the research is pretty ambiguous. The well-regarded research is very ambiguous. And the more we learn about plants, the more this confuses our understanding of what we thought we knew. And so I wanted to use the plants that I read about in this book that are like maybe sentient, but I wanted to amplify their properties. And so I knew then I had this goal of, okay, so I want to give people this escape, the sense of wonder, the sense of connection. I want to have plant magic, and everything kind of grew up from there. No pun intended.
And Raven herself, was she the first character that came to you in this story? Because she's the
Yeah.
protagonist, but there's
Yeah.
so many really interesting characters here. You have her stepbrother Ash,
Hmm.
who I loved, by the way,
Oh, I love Ash.
so much, so much. You have her mother, Violet, who passes. You have Delilah, who is
Hmm.
sort of like a wild card. You're not really sure if she's a safe person for Raven to be following or not. And then you have Cherry and Idris. It just really, did I mention Idris twice?
No, you did not. You did
Well,
not.
I mean, he could be mentioned twice because he's a pretty big character in the story for
Yeah.
various reasons. I'm not gonna spoil, but yeah, the surrounding cast and kind of how they weave into the story is fascinating. But was it Raven who came to you first?
It was not. It was not. The first character was actually Delilah. So Delilah is Raven's aunt, and she like the moment you meet her in the book. So Raven is working in this like plant conservatory. She works as like a horticulturalist. She's like taking care of these plants because her boss has like he's decided to rearrange the plants in the conservatory during a blizzard. And she comes back and all the plants are like hissing at her. They're angry, they're like crying because they're in the wrong spots. And so Raven has just started to rearrange these plants. She's taking care of herself. And then over like the glass ceiling roof, everything becomes dark because all of these ravens have landed, or sorry, all these crows have landed on top of the ceiling, and the doors sort of fly open, and this woman in this, dark dress emerges surrounded by crows. And that woman is Delilah, and that is Raven's aunt, who has been estranged from her, but has now rediscovered her at a crucial moment in Raven's life. And that is the character who began this story for me, this morally ambiguous woman who, has big Scorpio energy, who you're not sure, you're right, if she's a safe person or she's not. But what you do know is that she's very powerful and she's very competent. And she's interesting. I found Delilah to be particularly interesting to write.
As soon as you said that it wasn't Raven, it was like fireworks went off in my head. I'm like, it had to have been Delilah who came to you first because she really was very larger than life. Uh, as far as the way that the story is structured, so you learn a lot about Raven and Delilah's family, and you know the sirens that came beforehand, or the witches that came beforehand, um, by these beginning notes in each chapter, which is like the past notes of women.
hmm
Uh,
hmm
that was such a great way to tell the story behind the story. Did you write everything in parallel, or did you write that part at a different point than you were writing the rest of the story?
Yeah, so the epigraphs for all the books are it's a grimoire, so Book of Secrets. It's a Chyfrau Cyfryn for those who know their Welsh. I'm learning.
I wasn't even going
You
to
didn't want to
try.
say
I
it.
have to
Yeah.
say, I wasn't even going to try. And you do have like a little, a little thesaurus, little dictionary in the
Yeah.
beginning, which was great. But I'm like, even as somebody who's been to those areas, I'm not even going to attempt. So thank you.
And there are certain words that I feel I can pronounce with confidence, and other ones that I have to keep going back and being like, okay, how do I say that again? Because I am not a native Welsh speaker, but it felt important to include the actual Welsh. So with the epigraphs, there are these passages from other women in the Wynn family line who were passing down their wisdom about their magic. And so for me, again, when I was writing this magical system, I knew it was botanical magic. I knew it was about plants. And I also knew that it was passed down from woman to woman because I feel like that is how a lot of knowledge, if you're a woman in the world, like that's how a lot of knowledge in your family was passed down. I still remember my mom saying many, many years ago that if your joints are aching, you need to eat joints. Like you need to like have bone broth or something like soaked in cartilage. And it's, at that point, she didn't have the scientific background to know that that was true. And I don't even know when she learned that they had established that, but it was true. And it was a piece of wisdom that was passed down over generations of women. And so for me, I really wanted to include the wisdom passed down over generations of women, these women who'd carried this magic for so long. And so I knew I wanted to open each chapter with a passage from their book of secrets. But what I didn't know is what those passages were. And that was actually the very last thing that I added, in part because I wanted the epigraphs to relate to the theme of the chapter to sort of prime the reader for what was to come. And within editing, like things move around, they change, and so I couldn't add those until last. But I had the kernels of them. Like one of them is about the cones of these certain type of tree that the seeds live in these cones, but they'll only sprout after a forest fire, so after enough nitrogen gets in the soil. But again, like that's such a beautiful idea because it means that we have this whole plan for if your world is ever totally devastated, there's still seeds coming for you. Like there's still growth that can happen in this particular type of growth. So things like that. Like I'd read about those cones and I knew that I wanted to use them in an epigraph. I just didn't know where that epigraph would go.
I know I very briefly mentioned the side characters. Uh, Idris is sort of like the adversarial character who Raven finds infuriatingly attractive. And he's got really interesting magic as well. And actually, all of the characters do. I found Cherry to be really just sort of like this other. I don't want to call her a wild card either. I for it was a while, like I couldn't really tell where she was coming from for a bit. But, in the way that like I really wanted to find out more about
Mhm.
her, where did she sort of walk into the story?
So Cherry is a really interesting character. Cherry is somebody who Raven meets when she's learning how to use her magic. When Delilah is taking her under her wing, she says, "Oh, by the way, Cherry's gonna work with you." And she's like, "Who?" And she sees this girl and she's in like these little like tennis skirts and this little like matching outfit with these sneakers and they're supposed to be working on their assignment to learn their magic and instead she's like buying stuff online like $1,000 bags, whatever. And so I wanted the reader to sort of feel, oh, this is this superficial girl. I've seen this girl before, to kind of dismiss her. But then I think what I wanted to do with that character is to show the reader how, like, sometimes your first perceptions are kind of wrong. And that once you get to know her, you see that all of those things are a mask for something that's happening underneath that she doesn't have the words to articulate. And because of that, she performs. She's performing the role of a superficial girl who only cares about like clothes and about $1,000 bags. But actually, she is dealing with her own kind of magic and she doesn't know how to manage it. And all of the magics in this book have to do with emotions. So they're always driven by some emotional state. And I think that was really important too, metaphorically, as a way in which, I think women have a really deep emotional register and how this can be really powerful, but it can also be really destructive. And so I wanted to show Cherry as somebody with the same deep emotional register, but that is almost chronically suppressing it.
So again, the story it's just a really interesting story. I loved spending time with the characters. I loved kind of working out the mystery of Raven's past, and her magic and how she came into where she was. Uh, I I don't want to spoil anything, but it did have a really nice ending. However, I'm curious if you would open the door to revisiting this world ever.
Oh, I mean, sure. When I came out of the world, and this is, I don't know, embarrassing, or it's just what happens to writers. Like I was like, okay, now time to work on the next thing, and I couldn't because I was still in that world. So I wrote more. Like there's more that happens afterwards. I sort of know what happens in their lives because I needed it. Like as a writer, I needed to know the next thing for them. And whether or not that turns into a book someday, who knows? It will depend on how this book performs because a publisher, like the business reality is that a publisher is not going to sign up a sequel until the first book performs well. And so, yeah, but for me, I could absolutely revisit the world. And I know what would happen.
Before we started recording, you had mentioned the audiobook, and
Uh-huh.
us talking about it kind of reminded me that I really wanted to include some of that in this recording because it was fascinating what you were telling me. So, first of all, so who is narrating it?
So her name is Sorika Groundsell. She's an actor. I think she's in some shows on the BBC. Um, Very impressive, very talented woman. And she's also Scottish, which is a little odd for a choice for a narrator because the narrator, Raven, is American. And so I decided to go with Sorika for several reasons. One of them is that she could actually do the Welsh parts. So all of the epigraphs have a Welsh accent because they're Welsh ancestors. And there are many words in it, like Welsh spirits that are named, like the Chwarae Cyfrin, which is the Welsh Book of Secrets, all of that. So I wanted somebody who could do that justice and do it really well. And then the second thing was there's something very haunting about her voice that was really appealing to me. And I think a strangeness too. So when she speaks in an American accent, which is what she does for the majority of the book, it just sounds odd. And I mean that in the best way. You know how like Audrey Hepburn, like she sounded a little odd. You had some of these people,
Yeah,
right?
that was a thing. That was I think it was called a mid-Atlantic accent back in those days, where
Yeah.
all of the film stars of that time period, it was like there was a accent that they all kind of spoke with and a cadence, and it was supposed to kind of not be tied to one region. If I
Oh.
recall my film history, it's been a while, but I'm fairly sure. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and there are certain words that she'll say like anything becomes anything. Like that have a little bit of a lilt to them and you're like, that's odd, but I think I like it. I think I like that she doesn't sound in a way that is easy to categorize because I think that Raven herself is not easy to categorize. She feels like she's of a bunch of different worlds. She grew up in New York City, but she actually wasn't born there. She doesn't learn that until a little bit later, but not so late that it's a spoiler. And she is a siren, which is the sort of botanical witch that is featured in the book. But she also doesn't really identify as a siren because her mom died when she was young and bound her magic so that she had no access to it. And so there are these ways in which Raven herself is between worlds. And I liked the idea of having a narrator who also sounds like she's between worlds.
I think, especially since audiobooks are such a big thing, I think people are really going to enjoy that. And yeah, like you said, like being able to actually pronounce Welsh.
It's a superpower.
Yes, I know. I really do think like you have to have some native connection, at least to, because those languages are so interesting, and I'm so glad that there's been efforts taken to keep them alive. But it is like I don't eat like I open it up and I'm just the your thesaurus, and I'm like I'm not even going to attempt. I will look it up, but yeah. So yeah, no, thank you so much, Jennifer. So I mean, are you working on another book now, or are you just sort of feeling this one out for a bit?
I mean, I'm certainly playing around with a lot of ideas and we'll see kind of what happens. I think, the reality of publishing is it's just going to depend on how this book does in terms of what my next thing gets to be, unfortunately. But it's fun to play around in fantasy worlds where, anything could happen. And the trick with a fantasy is to kind of put guardrails on your imagination. It's not like necessarily to feel like you have to stay in this one particular lane. So that's been really fun and exploratory.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for coming back.
Thank you for having me. This was so nice.
Once again, this was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. My guest was,
Jennifer Herrera.
and we are going to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.